Hello, welcome. All right, and so let me get your names down. And so this week, as you notice, you're doing an assignment of a different format. It's very uh, just traditional, whereby I ask you to simply watch a video, a PBS video on the War of 1812, and to answer the questions that I have. So let me get the names down, and I'll go to the assignment itself. Hopefully, you have no problem finding the video. Like I said, all you have to do is hit uh, the site that I have on there. I have it for you. But you could also just YouTube PBS video of War of 1812 and should be able to find it. Okay. So hopefully you guys are doing well. As I'm getting the names down, I'm impressed by the number I have this time. Are there any questions? Any questions or comments as I'm writing the names down? All right, this is great. Let's see here.
I have a question, Professor.
Please.
Next week, will we be reviewing for test 2?
We sure will.
Okay, great.
Yeah, you by all means, please attend if you can. Although I plan to publish it, but still, get your extra credit for attending, and I'll answer any questions you have. I may not go question by question like I do on test 1 because it is college, and I don't want to go too far in spoon feeding you. But then again, I don't say no to a question. So if you have a question of a specific question on test 2, maybe take an early look at it as I shall have it posted. It should be posted already to look at. If not, I will rectify that as soon as possible and be prepared for whatever problems, issues that you have with any of the questions, and I'll be happy to help you. Remember also with test 2, with that which will be different is you'll just have one go at it instead of multiple submissions. For test 2 and 3 alone, those are the only two 50-point assignments in the semester that I have just a single submission rule. Okay. So yes, I will happily meet you at the typical time and answer any questions you have about test 2. And we will be doing that next week. This is the last subject, the War of 1812, prior to test 2. Okay. So you're looking at a video here, PBS video. It's a little dry, but it's informative. And you have the following questions. Who did the U.S. fight in the War of 1812? Like I said, I'm not very particularly proud of this assignment intellectually. Most of the time, I'm much more proud of being able to put things in an argumentative format. And I just have not, for various reasons, have failed to do so on this single subject. And so it is what it is at this point. But it should be just a little tedious, but pretty easy. Okay, so who did the U.S. fight in the War of 1812? How is Canada connected to the story? Give me a few sentences, if you don't mind, for each of them. I mean, the first one, just a single sentence. Number 3, let's see here. What reason or two is given for poor American military prowess? How does William Henry Harrison, play the villain in the narrative? What were the 2 official reasons for which the U.S. declared war? How is Tecumseh portrayed in the video? An example or 2, please. How did Detroit earn a negative story in the history book? So a lot of this is not argumentatively, formulated. It's pretty black and white. What is the story of the Star Spangled Banner song? Like I said, I'm the least proud of this particular assignment, to be honest, because it's not an argumentative format. It's pretty much cut and dry, lower level thinking, just memorization and just getting down the basic facts. So I wanted to give a little bit of context to the video and to what you see. Most of the fighting happened in the Great Lakes area. And that was no coincidence, because that's where land was contested with the Native Americans. You have to remember a few things is from the very get-go, there was territorial ambiguity. You have a multiplicity of tribes, okay, in this Great Lakes area that I'm referring to here. And in addition to that, you have, my goodness, you have Anglo-American expansion into that area. You have forts and cities once claimed by European colonizers, predominantly France and England. And then you also have English diplomacy. See, with diplomacy, right? For instance, they had given the Iroquois, they had grudgingly conceded to Iroquois claims of that land, but the multiplicity of tribes in that area contested it and contended this is not Iroquois land. The Iroquois are originally from Western New York, and they beg to differ on those claims regarding this tribe's sovereignty over that land. So the English had granted that land to the Iroquois, quite a bit of it in the Erie area, and of course the other tribes did not take kindly to that and contested it. And then in addition to that, you have the American Confederation, right, our first failed government, and its claims of public domain over that area, known as like the Northwest Ordinances. So you had that to contend with. And then you also had Native American leaders, different facets of I don't think it's too strong of a word, of uprisings. And so you have Little Turtle, you have Pontiac, and then after that you have Tenskwatawa, known as the Prophet. So you have all this interplay of factors that make this land in the Ohio Valley contested. And then of course you also have a British failure to evacuate the forts in the Great Lakes area. So all of this, right, is just a spell for a mess. And then I have a couple books here that I refer to. A couple of them, The War of 1812, one by Walter Bornemann is a pretty good one. This one by Donald Hickey isn't bad either. And then what I'm going to read from here is Adam Jortner's The Gods of Prophetstown here. But on page 86, he says, the Jefferson administration had chosen as the basis of its, quote, Indian policy, a more aggressive and virulent form of acculturation, right? And so virulent, right? Very hostile form of acculturation. And acculturation is another for assimilation, dropping your culture and embracing the culture of someone else's, right? Originally developed by Secretary of War Henry Knox, K-N-O-X. The nominal idea was to subsidize efforts to teach Native Americans to live like whites. And so you have efforts of, you have Anglo-American efforts. One was for Native American assimilation. And another one was for the how would I say it? Not the proliferation, not the, just the apportionment of allotted private plots of land. Good old capitalism, right? Let me make this a little bigger. All right. So you have factors such as this that make the Ohio Valley very combustible, right? And so it seems like it's just waiting for a few leaders, for a few events to really take off. Remember, during the Articles of Confederation, a couple different colonies like Virginia and Pennsylvania are going to claim that land and fight over it and not want to cede it to the Confederation. When the Confederation did it, they had drama with private land companies, big businessmen who were trying to engage in land speculation, trying to buy the land as cheaply as possible or receive it as cheaply as possible, and then wait for it to develop because they were trying to put everything into 6 square acre mile plots and develop it by the land surveying office of the Confederate government, according to the Northwest ordinances. And so many of those would constitute a city, and so many a county, and so many would have future state. But the Native Americans had something to say about that, obviously, living on that land for centuries, for if not longer than that. Well, for sure, for millennia. And so at any rate, it's going to really take off with Tenskwatawa. Tenskwatawa is going to contend that, and he's not the only one, but he was very successful and got a lot of attention. Tenskwatawa is going to gain attention as a prophet, going to contend, right, that the Native Americans need to return to their religious roots. They need to kick the corrupt white man and the white man's culture and ways, particularly alcohol, etc., out of their lifestyles. And the Great Spirit would help wipe the white man off the face of their land and return the land to his quote red people. So at any rate, Tenskwatawa was big. In very interesting stuff. I mean, at one time he even claimed to, in front of a crowd, predict a solar eclipse and stuff like that, contending that he had divine powers, etc. And then the perfect villain comes in, right, in the form of a territorial governor. And remember, a territorial governor has power to declare martial law, right? Territorial Governor William Henry Harrison. And as the video will contend, he was a very kind of, long before the expression will take flight, especially in the 1840s, but a kind of guy of manifest destiny outlook, whereby he thought it was destined by the Judeo-Christian God for the red race to be dispossessed of its land, and for the white Anglo-American population to take as much as the continental North American land as possible. And so he comes in and plays the perfect villain. He tries to discredit Tenskwatawa. He wants to have him arrested under false pretenses. He tries to goad him into fighting. He tries to sell, working with the land surveying office, tries to have as much land sold and claimed for development, Anglo development, as possible. And so it's just a conflict waiting to happen. And then there's evidence, right, that there was British collusion with Tenskwatawa. His brother, and he will become equally famous. And his name was Tecumseh. He was known as Tecumseh, right? And you'll find that in the video as well. And so the American forces, as Brinkley states and as the video states, kind of provoked conflict at, let's see here, American forces provoked conflict at Tippecanoe. So a big battle occurs at a place called Tippecanoe. And what do you know? It's when Tecumseh is not there, and he's trying to gain allies down throughout the Appalachian region, all the way down into the Deep South. And the euphemism for the Native Americans, and of course the British, right? The British promised Native American sovereignty over their land in return for military alliance versus the U.S. So when they began burying some of the dead at Tippecanoe, they found that the Native Americans had British weapons, right? And so hence that there was actual collusion between the British and the Native Americans against the U.S. government, against the U.S. forces sent there under the president, and in turn under the regional governor, William Henry Harrison. So a lot of great man history in the War of 1812, a lot of leaders who made very influential decisions that in turn catapulted events into the direction in which they went. The euphemism for the Native Americans who fought, against the U.S., they were known as Red Sticks. That was the euphemism that we'll give during and after the war because of their ochre painted tomahawks. All right. So going back up here, the video is pretty clear on a lot of it, but notice, right? So notice catching it, right? Who did we fight in the War of 1812? We fought Great Britain. Great Britain existed from 1707, right? Not just England, but with Scotland, Northern Ireland, and we'll include Canada and Australia, etc. But at any rate, we fought Great Britain and her Native American allies, the Red Sticks, right? And they didn't always neatly bifurcate into tribes. It wasn't just certain tribes that fought against us. Sometimes the tribes themselves split as to who fought as Red Sticks against us and who fought with us. But as you'll notice, a couple of the tribes that become infamous as Red Sticks are the Shawnee and the Creek. Were primarily against us in the War of 1812. All right, so war is going to break out at Tippecanoe. And then there's also what's going to galvanize Americans here in the Kentucky, Tennessee area, right? And that's another thing, and that's another combustible thing, is that in the Tennessee, Kentucky frontier region, right, just becoming states, you had a lot of Scots-Irish immigration. And the Scots-Irish had a very libertarian reputation. Government, don't tread on me. I want to come and forge my own farm. I don't want any government interference. And so they had a kind of a defiant just reputation that preceded them. During the War for Independence, I think of like Kings Mountain, whereby some of the Scots-Irish in this area refused to fight with either side, either the American patriots or rebels, or the Tories staying loyal to Great Britain and the British. And the British, one of the British governors, I believe of Virginia, sent a dragoon unit in to punish them, and they defeated the dragoons at Kings Mountain. And then they got a congratulatory letter from no less of a figure than George Washington, and said, you know, congratulations, now please join the rebellion. And they said, no, thank you. We want to stay out of it. It's not our fight. We just want to carve our own land out and have our own area. And so, and then of course, George Washington pretty much said, I'll deal with you later. And that's the type of reputation they had. In one of the Carolinas, if my memory serves me correctly, there was an edict by the legislature saying, Scots-Irish, you're not welcome in this colony during the War for Independence. Please keep on moving through our colony, move further inland into the Kentucky, Tennessee region, etc. And so this is where Andrew Jackson is going to, and his demographic is going to become, they're going to become very popular within a generation after the War of 1812. But at this time, it's still arguable. They still were kind of marginalized as a demographic by the American government, by the coastal region inhabitants of the United States, of the young United States. But one thing or another, like I said, that libertarian outlook and that reputation, it lent toward a lot of friction with the Native Americans. And so there was a, if you wanted to look further into it, there was a Duck Creek massacre that occurred at this, in this region at this time. And then into the Deep South, you had the Fort Mims massacre, whereby Anglo inhabitants, I want to say it was Alabama. Shame on me for not remembering precisely, but I think it was Alabama. And the Anglo-American inhabitants therein were given the impression that if they reported to Fort Mims, they would be safe when war broke out with the Red Sticks. And the Creek and other tribes came in, broke into Fort Mims, and they massacred men, women, and children there. And so the press ran with this. And so then now you're going to get a lot of volunteers from the Kentucky, Tennessee region throughout the Deep South coming to fight against Red Sticks as well as against the British. And then, of course, the most famous fight against the British down in the Deep South was ironically after the war had already ended, but they did not know so. And that was the Battle of New Orleans. And it was famous because it was such a motley group of Americans as far as the ethnicity, socioeconomic background, region of origin, etc. And this motley, diverse group of Americans fought off wave after wave of British attacks. And of course, it's going to make Andrew Jackson a hero, a war hero. All right. So looking at this with the video, so notice who we fought. Like I said, we're going to fight Great Britain and the Native American allies to Great Britain. Notice the two official reasons for which the U.S. declared war. One will become very apparent in the video, and that I'll get to that in just a moment. But the second one that's not quite as overtly stated was that contending, right, that the British were fomenting rebellion amongst the Native Americans, that the Germans, the British were provoking the Native Americans and equipping them, right, and literally giving them weapons to fight against the U.S. government. That's the second official reason I'm looking for. And then as far as a global context, is, of course, you had the French Revolution and the intervention of the Holy Alliance. That was Great Britain, Austria, and Prussia. Remember, they're going to try to, because there were literally blood ties with Louis the 16th. They're going to try to intervene and save Louis the 16th's life over revolutionary France, to no avail. As you know, during the French Revolution, he was publicly executed. And when the Gironde lose control of to the Jacobins, right, in the French Revolution, things became much more radical. They declared year one of reason. They attacked the Roman Catholic Church of France, and the Judeo-Christian calendar was scrapped. I mean, some major revolutionary changes. They pretty much declared war against the nobility and dispossessed the landed nobility. And they had these mock trials as far as treason against the state. Remember, they had that Marat guy, their propagandist, Robespierre, their leader. Things got pretty radical. So at that point, right, when the Jacobins took over, it became intolerable for the other European powers. And so hence they intervened. And then after some chaos and some civil strife within France, you have, of course, the rise of Napoleon and his Napoleonic Code. And very ironic, right? Because Napoleon ruled as the emperor of revolutionary France, but his Napoleonic Code was very enlightened in many ways. Rights for women, rights for the commoners, political participation from the commoners. It's riddled with contradictions, the Napoleonic Code, but still with this autocratic leader at its head and at the head of its army. And that's where, right, where he's going to continue, he's going to spread the French Revolution throughout Europe, and he'll even invade Egypt and Russia, etc. Right. And so you have a near world war that occurs, known as simply the Continental or Napoleonic Wars. So while that's going on, right, you have notions of just war doctrine. And those came largely from the Catholic Church. And it was in two categories, right? It was reasons for fighting a war and the manner by which war is fought. I used to have it memorized what the Latin phrases were. I don't remember. I'm sorry. But the second category is mainly what we're talking about. Is they would have these conventions, right? These European conventions deciding on proper times for war to cease and when proper times for fighting would exist. The leaving non-combatants alone, their safety. So discriminating between combatants and non-combatants, and also the right of neutral nations. And of course, within those rights are the rights of commerce or trade. If you have two belligerent nations that are at war and have declared war and are fighting, right? There was a, literally it was called against the list, contraband, right? Contraband was delineated. They made it clear, okay, what is against the forbidden list, right, of what that which cannot be traded by a neutral country when at least two belligerent powers are fighting a war. And of course, right, they're dealing with war material. However you spell material, I thought it was different from material. But at any rate, I'm a terrible speller, sorry. So you can't sell guns, you can't sell gunpowder and ammunition to either belligerent nation, right? But as long as it's not on that list, it's supposed to be okay. So food, textiles, or clothing, right, and other commodities that are not considered war material, you're supposed to have the ability to that is known as your international rights as a neutral nation. And so you're going to see in the video, right, both sides are going to infringe upon that right of young America. And in the video, right, in the video, they say basically that they took advantage of our weakness, basically. That's my loose paraphrase of what the guy says. He says basically they ran rampant over the rights of a second-rate nation. So the Leopard, that was the British ship versus Chesapeake incident. You'll see that in the video where they clearly violated our rights as a neutral nation. And then in addition to that, right, the term impressment. And they're pretty clear about it in the video. The British took passengers from American ships and impressed them into the British Navy. And I find this fascinating, right? Because, you know, we were only beginning to approximate something close to like a social security card, if you will, or some kind of identification for your citizenship, because we had a very porous border, and there we already had marked out a special place in Article 1, Section 8 for Congress to deal with immigration and naturalization, becoming a citizen. But already, according to a source that I was reading, there was a black market that existed for forging American citizenship papers. Because after all, right, the markers for personal identity aren't there yet. They don't have photography yet, and they don't work with the fingerprint until what, the 1890s. And so it's just a paper that describes your name, where you were from, how you'd become a citizen, and then according to one source that I read, gives a which to me is crazy with morphology, the way that the human body changes through the aging process. They would have a physical description of you, right? But anyone can do that. You know, you're a man in your 20s and you pay money from Scotland, from England, from wherever, to have someone write American papers for you to say that you're a citizen of the state of North Carolina, and then say, you know, dark hair, light blue eyes, whatever it might be, they could just forge it and you could purchase it. And the British knew that. So at any rate, and then what also was interesting to me is the evolution of dialects of language, right? Because when you think about it, the British, they transplanted their ways, their culture, including, right, the habit of the tongue as it speaks the English language here in the British Isles or in British North America. And so I don't begin to understand. I try to study it the little extra time I get, but I have not begun to unravel, scratch beyond the surface to understand the folk ways of the dialect of tongue. How in the South the gentry class seem to have created the Southern drawl. Up in Boston, it's very emphatic. Tone and its particular accent, the New England accent from bourgeois areas of Bristol and Liverpool. To me, that's fascinating. And so I like to think that demarcation that we see today, right? Like you have that that proverbial English accent as opposed to the English Australian accent, the English Scottish accent, the English Irish accent. That's just fascinating to me. I like to think that the demarcation that we see was not so clear back then, as far as the way George Washington spoke as a Southern gentleman from the gentry class, and one of the British, leaders in his same that especially that lived all his life in Virginia along with him. So at any rate, my point being, in a long-winded fashion, was there much of a demarcating difference between a guy with a British accent and an American with his own distinct dialect? I don't think there was that great of a difference, especially as the difference as you see today. And so you see an Englishman and you look at Americans demographically back then, America was much more WASP than it is today, much more white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Most immigration came from Northern and Western Europe, from the British Isles, especially to the Americas by this time of 1812. And so what I'm saying is the difference was a lot more narrow between a Brit and an American in looks, in dialect, etc. And so how in the world can you really be sure that you're discerning between a runaway British naval private and an American? And so, of course, they couldn't truly, in many cases, probably know. And they utilized that power of theirs in abusing the situation. And in many cases took Americans who had never known England, had never been born there, had never known the land, and certainly had never volunteered to join the British Navy. And now they're impressed into the British Navy. So that clearly was a violation of our international right as a neutral nation during these Napoleonic Wars. So that was the second reason for which we fought. The British fomented rebellion amongst our Native Americans, and the British were violating our neutral rights, our international rights as a neutral nation to trade and to be safe in our autonomy and our independence on American ships on the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean. All right. And I think most of the questions, the answers to these are pretty self-explanatory in the video. Trying to think, I don't know if you've had a chance yet to look at the video. But like I said, the Star Spangled Banner song, you'll see the story with that. You'll see the story of Detroit. There will be quite a bit on Tecumseh and how he's portrayed. Yeah, I'm trying to think anything else that I need to give you as added context. I think we're good. I think as far as everything else being pretty cut and dry from the video. Are there any questions or comments on this War of 1812? So another factor that popped in my head from the video, right? It says only very briefly, is it mentions the age of Congress when they declared war rather narrowly. And it's one of the most youngest sessions of Congress we've ever had. A lot of men in their 30s and 40s in Congress at this time. And so they go with this stereotypical right notion that with literally more testosterone in their bodies, like it says in the video, what was permissible for one generation of older men was not permissible for this new young generation of men who weren't going to have this affront to our national dignity, right? And so hence playing on that notion of young, prideful Americans. And then also, right, as a guy will mention in the video, is some support of the war because they knew they could foresee that, because we had a history of this throughout the colonial period, is we're rather vindictive toward Native Americans regarding land dispossession after we fight them, right? We punish them for fighting against us by taking their land at the end of war, wars at least in which we win. And so there was a lot of land for the taking that was contested in the Ohio Valley, in the Tennessee, Kentucky region, and also into the deep south of Mississippi and Alabama, which aren't even states yet, by fighting against the Red Sticks. So it's going to produce a new generation of heroes, this war. It's going to forge a sense of unity in the sense that there's going to be a one-party rule. The Democratic Jeffersonian Party alone is going to prevail at the end, by the end of this war. The old Federalist Party is going to dismantle itself by the end of the war. And what's interesting is by the end of the war, the Liberal Party, the Jeffersonians, in many ways embraced, ironically, the platform of their opponent, their historical opponent, Alexander Hamilton, and embracing a more industrialized, commercialized, with lots of infrastructure, powerful empire, country, republic, as opposed to a decentralized, democratic, agrarian, Jeffersonian republic, which was rather ironic, right? That Jefferson's party didn't stand by that ideal. All right, so do you guys feel like you have the basic context to this war, to this video going into it? Like I said, you see how cut and dry the questions are. Any questions, comments? Can I get a thumbs up? Some type of response to try to gauge where we are. Thank you. All right, and by all means, you don't have to give a thumbs up if you're confused or not satisfied with enough context. By all means, ask me another question if you like, but I just like to know where we are. Like I said, this is the second best thing to meeting in class. I'm very eager to meet back in class, going a little stir crazy at home. But it's nice to meet with you online. Okay. Well, ironically, with that having been said, that's pretty much usually what I share as the context of the War of 1812. That's kind of all I have to say, unless someone has a specific question that I'd be happy to address.
So your link works, and it's about a 2-hour long documentary.
Yeah, I apologize for that. Good. That's great to hear, though, Savan, that the link works. Like I said, it's a little dry, it's a little long. I apologize. But that's great that the link works.
I looked through the Canvas and I didn't see the test two posted, the
Oh,
review.
okay,
So just want to make sure that you remember to do it after.
absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me. All right, so I've just noted that for myself right now. So I will definitely post test two forthwith. All right. All right. Well, if that's all, you guys, if there aren't any other questions, I have your names down. I'll be happy to give you your extra credit for this assignment. And I'll go ahead and bid you adieu until next week when we meet at the same time. And I'll answer any questions you have on test two. Okay. All
All
right.
right.
So
Go. Thank you.
thank you, Savan. I appreciate your input. Thank you. All right. Have a good week, everybody. Okay.